We can go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. My name is John May. I'm the engagement manager here for Webgility. I've been here for about 5 years, and I've been in e-commerce for a lot longer than that. But today we're going to be talking about hiring affordability, more specifically as it relates to your real margin, your fully loaded margin, and understanding how that affects your ability to onboard a new person. This is part of our, obviously, the e-commerce clinic, but the 100 questions sort of series that I've been doing recently. Over the last month or so, we released a new resource for e-commerce sellers, sort of like a you don't know what you don't know situation. We compiled a list of the top 100 questions that we see from e-commerce owners and their teams, and it puts these 100 questions together for you in a way that I think makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to drop that link in chat if you wanted to review those. Um, Basically, if you've ever had a question about e-commerce accounting specifically, this resource will cover that. But these sessions are sort of following that resource, following those 100 questions, and kind of picking them apart one by one. We most definitely won't get through all 100 of them, but I'm covering some of the biggest ones. And this actually happens to be a topic that I covered in the very beginning of the e-commerce clinic series, but today's session will be a little bit more, I think, pointed, a little more of a simplistic, I guess, approach to the conversation. Because at the end of the day, all we really need to understand is that affordability and how to essentially make that decision, make that call yourself. So how this works, again, this is question 74 out of 100 on our 100 questions list. But the reason we're covering this today is your P&L might show a margin, and we talk a lot about your P&L sort of inflating things. But if it's built on netted payouts or things that just get posted directly to your bank account without itemized, I guess, reconciliation, segmented reconciliation, the margin's going to be overstated, and the higher you might feel sure about because you're looking at that inflated number, might end up straining your cash if you're not careful. So, this session is not to tell you not to hire. As always with my sessions, this isn't something that I'm making the decision for you. These sessions are designed to point at the number that you're looking at and make sure that that number is accurate and that you feel confident in it, and then how to use that number to make the better decision. So it's never a case of, you shouldn't hire. It's not a good idea to hire. It's more if you can make the number make sense for you, if you can look at the number in its completed state and make it make sense, then that's perfectly fine. But the ultimate goal here is to just give you the confidence and know that the numbers that you're looking at are accurate and speak to the truth. So in the next 30 minutes, we will cover the question. We will go through a walkthrough on the whiteboard and then do sort of a quick open Q&A. Again, these sessions are only 30 minutes, so it's about as deep as you can get in 30 minutes, I would say. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them as we go along. But again, the question for today is the higher your books might say you can easily afford, is it something you can actually afford? And if you feel like it, if you have the number in your head, show of hands or in the chat, keep in mind what your gut feel margin is right now. Do you have your margin on hand? Do you know what it is? Do you have an idea of what it is? Feel free to drop it in the chat, or again, just keep it in the back of your mind as we go through this exercise. All right, so we will hop on over to the whiteboard. As always, I did a little bit of groundwork to make sure the whiteboard is as easy flowing as possible. In 30 minutes, it's really hard to just design a whole whiteboard and have you guys watch me type everything out. But yeah, we'll start with, again, can you afford that new hire? We'll start with the hire itself. So the hire itself, let's just say you wanted to add a role, and the offer letter that you have for that specific role is $3,500 a month. Nothing crazy, pretty, generally entry level sort of position here. But the fully loaded, taxes, benefits, and tools, you've already done the math, right? That comes out to, we'll say, $4,500 a month. So a little bit more expensive when you include all the things that need to be included when you hire that person, right? And as we go along, if you want to drop in chat, is anybody kind of planning on hiring this quarter? Are you weighing the decision to hire this quarter, and that's why you attended this session, or is it just something that you generally want to know? I think it'd be cool to know if anybody is kind of going through this thought process right now. That lived experience is really cool to kind of see anecdotally. So again, you want to add the role. Again, the offer letter is $3,500 a month, and the fully loaded taxes, benefits, and tools comes out to $4,500 a month. So only $1,000 more. And then you go and look at your books, right? So your books say your revenue is 50K. Your margin looks like 38%, we'll say. And your profit before the hire is $12,000. Okay. So on paper, judging by what your books say currently, your hire is going to cost, again, $4,500, which leaves about $7,500. And what you might be thinking now, as you look at your books and you look at your revenue, your margin projected, your profit, you might look at that $7,500 and say, that's an easy yes, right? Like I can easily afford this hire. Let's go ahead and, pull the trigger on this, right? So what you need to do, instead of just leaving it at this, is look at the actual truth, the actual real life margin for your books to understand how this number changes, right? So if you look at your COGS, those are posted per order, and you should have your fees itemized, right? So you should have everything itemized to understand exactly within that deposit, within that reconciliation, what the real margin for everything is at the end of the day, right? So your real margin might end up being 19%. And this is something that we've covered in a couple past sessions, talking about how to calculate your real margin. And really, all of these sessions sort of contribute to that real margin, right? Like the overall theme of these e-commerce clinic sessions is that we sort of pick one piece of your books and understand how that contributes to the real margin. So a lot of times stuff like your Amazon settlements, your Shopify payouts, any auxiliary or ancillary fees and expenses that you see on the back end need to be itemized so that you can understand how it's impacting your profits and your margin, right? So again, your real margin here ends up being 19%, not 38%. So there's a pretty big dip from that 38% that you have here, looking at your revenue of 50,000. So your profit before the hire is actually going to be $2,500 after that number. After you do the math, that profit drops significantly, right? That's almost 10 grand difference. So that's going to be half the margin that you thought, which is a big deal, right? So my question here, to sort of take a beat as we lay the groundwork out here, is, do you know your real net margin, right? Have you done the math and done all of the necessary groundwork to understand what your actual net margin is? Because again, the offer letter says $3,500, but the books say $4,500 with the fully loaded, and then not understanding what the margin actually ends up being means that if you were to make the decision based off of just what your books say at face value, you're already sort of in the hole, so to speak, for that hire before you even get them onboarded. And that doesn't even include some of the things that we talked about in the initial sort of hiring affordability session that I did earlier in the e-commerce clinics, which is, you can look at the on paper costs of hiring somebody, like again the taxes, the benefits, and the tools. Those are all generally pretty well understood metrics, right? Like you can do the math on those very easily, understand all the subscriptions that they need access to, generally the range of their benefits, and then the taxes, right? That's all pretty easily calculatable. But it doesn't include things that are sort of strains on the rest of the business that drag down productivity, like their ramp time. If somebody else left that was a lot more seasoned and you're replacing them, there is that like sort of tribal knowledge that you're losing. So there's some intangible, I guess, considerations to be making on top of the cost. So that's why it's so important to understand what the actual cost is, and how much money you're actually looking at from a profit perspective before bringing somebody else on. Because if you can't calculate this number and you already aren't going to be able to quantify some of the other, extraneous things, it makes it a lot more complicated to make the decision clearly, right? So again, this is not to tell you not to hire. Again, this is just to sort of give you that confidence. Revenue is not affordability, right? Your revenue looks great, 50,000 here. Your margin might look great, but what you actually end up keeping at the end of the day is the most important number. Revenue is great, and it's something that you can use very, you know, strategically to, secure more funding, impress the board, tell your friends, but the actual, take home net margin is the most important number that you should be keeping track of because it allows you to make these decisions and know if you're making the right decision, right? So a hire is sort of a bet against your margin, and you should know the real one before you make that bet. Okay, so let's reconcile it, right? So pretty easy sort of flow chart here, which is your books, again, will say 38%. That's what your margin looks like. If you haven't done the itemization, that 38% looks really great. Your profit before the hire says $12,000, just like we have above. The loaded hire says 4,500. I'm going to use dollar signs here. And then your leftover, again, says $7,500. But when you reconcile it, when you actually have the real numbers in front of you, your reconciled margin is at 19%. Your profit before the hire is lower at $2,500. Your loaded hire, again, still at that $4,500. Still an accurate place to sort of start. And then your leftover ends up being $2,000. Um, so again, just to sort of drive this home, this is pre-reconciliation. After reconciliation, after you've segmented those fees or itemized those fees and your COGS costs per order, that's what you sort of end up with, right? So this ends up being the same hire, right? This is the same scenario, but it is an opposite decision. Because if you're looking at, a $7,500 surplus versus $2,000 in the opposite direction, you're going to reconsider what the decision actually is, right? So to truly cover the cost of the hire, you would need $23,000 a month in revenue, not 11K or 12K, what we have up here. You would need to double that almost to make sure that hire actually makes sense in this scenario. And this is all, I guess, more trying to think of the word. It's these figures that I'm using may not be indicative of what your actual reality is, obviously. This is just sort of an illustrative example. So not exactly real numbers, but sort of ballpark, right? Um, so after you look at the reconciliation, you want to understand what the rules here are. Because I can say, segment your fees and, make sure your costs, your COGS are kind of segmented inside of your books and everything will be fine. But we need to look at what the rules actually should be for this situation when you're reconciling, right? How do you come to these numbers? How do you come to these conclusions? So 3 rules here, which is hire against your real margin, not revenue. So don't look at your revenue and expect that that's going to tell you the whole story when it comes to hiring somebody and bringing somebody onto the organization. Which is that's a pretty easy, statement to follow. If you understand how to calculate your real margin, this decision becomes very easy. The groundwork then becomes making sure that you have everything contributed to give you your real margin at a glance rather than having to go and calculate it every single time. So there's a lot of resources on doing that. Again, I'll include some reading on your net margin in the toolkit, so you'll be able to sort of do that math if you haven't already. But a lot of it just comes down to making sure that all of your channels, whether that be your sales channels, your marketing channels for ad spend, your shipping and fulfillment channels, all those things should feed back into your source of truth, which is your QuickBooks or your company file. And all of those, those connections, the paper trail that's created from those connections, should have their own buckets inside of your QuickBooks, inside of your company file to be able to segment them and sort of divide them up any way that you see fit. It makes reporting super easy because you're able to, manipulate what data you're looking at any given time so that you can find, your net margin or your contribution margin, stuff like that, that allows you to make decisions for different parts of the business based off of all the data that you're getting. So the second rule here is, if I can type, there we go, fully load the cost. And I use the term fully loaded here a lot because it just implies that you're getting all of the information that you need to be able to make that decision. So a fully loaded cost means you're getting all of those auxiliary fees that we talked about, all of the cogs that contribute to the order, that contribute to the revenue at the end of the day to understand what you're actually taking home, right? So we're going to put that at 1.3 times the salary of the individual that you're hiring. That's a pretty conservative estimate. Generally, it's a little higher, between 1.5 and 2 times the salary if you wanted to be really comfortable. But the floor, I would say, is 1.3 times the salary. So you need to make sure that the cost is fully loaded there. And the third rule is going to be turn the hire into a revenue target. Um, and the equation here is going to be loaded cost divided by real margin. And let's add a line. Right, so that's a really easy equation, a little bit of an abstract sort of concept. I mean, it's really easy to say, like, hey, when we hire somebody, we need to make sure that we're hitting a revenue target to make it make sense. Make sure that that person contributes enough to the revenue to sort of pay for themselves, essentially. And that can be a little bit hard of a or a nebulous concept for some organizations to uh, point to, especially if the person that you're hiring isn't directly related to revenue, if they work in the back office or something that is a little harder to quantify. But there are ways to do that. Like I said, we covered this a little bit more extensively in the past for hiring affordability. We talked a little bit about, sort of how to quantify those employees. So I'll include a link to that past session as well because it goes into a little bit more of that minutia. This one is more specifically about the reconciliation process behind a hire rather than, like, how do you quantify an employee's value based on what they contribute to the business, right? So there's two essentially both important but separate conversations happening there. But again, so I think the most important here is understanding the floor. So your real monthly profit should clear the loaded cost of a hire with a little bit of room to spare, right? So if you can calculate your monthly profit, understand what the margin is, and then make sure that it clears that floor here, that 1.3x the salary of the employee, then it's a little easier to make that decision because you have a little bit of wiggle room, right? And wiggle room's always good, especially when it comes to bringing somebody on that is going to affect the overall success of the business. Whether or not they're a high level employee or somebody that's entry level, they still do impact the flow of the business. And again, this is all money at the end of the day that's flowing, and you need to be able to understand what's costing you and how it's affecting the business internally, right? So, um, the last part of the whiteboard here is the turn, right? So this whole cost or the whole decision that you're making rests on the one number. And we mentioned it a lot here, which is real margin. So your real margin is what determines if you can afford it. So if you don't know what your real margin is, that's the biggest thing that you can do right now to sort of get ahead of this situation. If you're looking at hiring somebody, is understanding how to calculate your real margin, understanding all the numbers that feed into that real margin for your business. Most books inflate it, like we talked about. A lot of people, Amazon's a really easy example for this because, again, we've talked about that a lot, but Amazon settlements, they get posted as a single deposit to your bank account. And it's really easy to just look at that and be like, okay, well, that's my, that's the revenue. That's the revenue I generated. Don't need to look at it into it any deeper. And the reality is, you need to look at the itemization behind that settlement report to understand exactly where the costs are going, in each part of the business. Because without doing that, you're not understanding what the actual margin is, right? It can seem a little abstract, but understanding that itemization, that segmentation of all of your data makes things a lot easier to sift through the noise when you're making decisions for your business, and again, feel confident that you're making the right decision. So the most simplistic way of looking at this is understand your COGS per order. So for every single order, what's the cost that's incurred? Make sure all of your fees are itemized for any service that you have that impacts your business, right? So sometimes it's not going to be as straightforward as, using Webgility and pulling in all of your orders and your settlement report and your Shopify expenses and everything automatically into QuickBooks. There might be some manual work for some of the channels that you have, but any channel that you have that is, an expense, whether it be a marketing expense, a shipping fulfillment expense, or a product related expense, those should feed back into your books. So there's plenty of integrations out there for all types of channels that put that information directly into QuickBooks for you. Um, and then make sure that you're not netting it from the payout. So don't look directly at the payout that gets put in as a net deposit in the bank account. That's a good place to start, but you want to then segment it further to understand what the honest, real net margin is there. Again, very simplistic way of looking at it. If we wanted to sort of build out the equation a little bit more, um, so your real margin equals revenue. Oops. And I'm gonna minus all COGS, fees, and refunds. Right? So that's pretty easy equation, but you don't want to include the P&L number when Amazon posts as a net deposit and COGS is missing. So biggest thing here is that COGS needs to be included. So again, this is where that 38% is on the books, but it ends up being 19% because you're just looking at the net deposit that Amazon put in the bank account, not the COGS that are associated with it, right? So the next sort of equation here, revenue needed to cover the hire equals your loaded cost divided by your real margin. So that $4,500 that we looked at for the loaded hire, divided by 0.19, which is the real margin, that 0.19, the 19%, is about $23,700 a month, right? Versus the 11,000, almost $12,000 that we put the profit at before. So again, that's where you're getting the disparity, the gap between the two numbers here. Okay, and the affordability floor. Your real monthly profit should clear the loaded cost with room to spare. So this fully loaded cost that we're talking about under the rules, you should have a little bit of room to spare to make sure that you can cover that higher. If the margin's really thin for you there, it might not make sense to pull on that new hire. And honestly, again, this isn't to reiterate, this session is not to tell you that you shouldn't be hiring anybody or that it's not a good idea. It's more to give you the ammunition to make the decision for yourself. So you could, again, have a plan that includes maybe you're underwater on the hire, but you feel that that employee is going to bring enough value to offset that cost. You still need to understand what the cost is before making the decision. Because again, making decisions off of gut feel and without accurate data is ultimately where you wind up into trouble. Again, if you look at this and you say, okay, I can still make this make sense. I have a plan for promotion or, my my ad campaign looks really good for the end of the year because of Black Friday or something like that, you might still end up deciding that it's better to have that employee and take a little bit of a loss for the time being while they get ramped up and you point them in the right direction. So, um, the last thing that I'll mention here on the whiteboard is that there's sort of it's a cash rule that's worth repeating, right? So a common guideline here is to hold enough cash to cover the loaded cost plus about 20% for a full year before you commit. That's ultra conservative, making sure that you're very safe as much as you can hedge your bets, I guess. But again, if you have a plan, if you are confident in your numbers at the end of the day and your plan, then feel free to make that decision. This isn't to tell you not to do that. But let's head back over to the slide deck and we can end it here with a Q&A. But the takeaway kit for today is generally it's going to be very similar to the past weeks. I try to include the same sort of package, just different related to the topic. So you'll get an affordability calculator plus a tracker. It's a Excel workbook, so there's a couple tabs, and you can use that as sort of a template for running your own affordability analysis. There's always that AI prompt that I include there, whether you like AI or not. It can make it a lot easier to plug your own data in and understand where you're at from an analysis standpoint, and then a resource list that should point you in the right direction for some continued learning. You'll also get the whiteboard and the slide deck that I just showed that you're currently looking at, and the full recording for the session. So to end it today, the hire that breaks you is the one that your book said that you could afford when you in reality could not. So the whole decision sort of lies in that real margin that we talked about. If you are a Webgility customer and you want to know how to, take advantage of everything that I talked about and make sure things are streamlined, you can reach out to me or your CSM and we can make sure that we, make sure things are set up properly for you, schedule a refresher session and just set everything up. If you are not a Webgility customer, you can click the link in this slide here. It'll be included in the deck. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you can talk to our team about what all of this means from a high level standpoint and how making sure that things are reconciled and segmented makes your business run a lot smoother and probably makes you sleep a little better at night. But we'll end it here with Q&A. If you have any questions in the chat, feel free to type them. I always prepare a couple of questions that I would ask if I were in your shoes. So I will kind of ask those as I wait for anybody else to add their questions in chat. So I guess we'll start with I know I've reiterated this isn't to tell you not to hire, but if you need the help right now and you're saying, hey, if my number doesn't make sense, should I just not hire them, right? The answer is a lot more complicated, right? This isn't saying not to hire. The workload can be very real, right? And a hire can be right. If you sort of delay a hire and you're going into the holiday season, right? And the rest of your employees are, sort of picking up the slack for that that spot that's available. That can lead to burnout for the rest of the team. So there's a lot of, I guess, dominoes that are sort of impacted by this sort of decision. But the point is, again, to make sure that you're making the call off of that real margin so that you can fund it deliberately, you can understand what the cost is deliberately, and ultimately just have visibility is the biggest thing. Again, if you don't know what your real margin is, just to reiterate, it's revenue minus all costs of goods sold. So including marketplace fees, refunds, and everything per order. So it's not that number that your P&L shows when Amazon deposits it as a net deposit. It's everything after the fact, sort of your end of the day, all fees included, fully loaded, like I said. If you are looking to hire somebody that's part-time, again, because we sort of mentioned Black Friday, the holiday season, if you're looking to hire somebody part-time, that fully loaded number might seem like a little bit of overkill, like you're doing a little bit too much math for somebody that's going to be on for a limited period of time. But part-timer still carries those payroll taxes. It's like 7 and something percent FICA plus unemployment. And you're still going to have them on the tools and onboard them properly. So generally budgeting for that, 1.3, 1.2 to like 1.5 times the wage is a good start right there. A contractor might shift the mix that we're talking about, so that short part-time situation might shift it a little bit. But it is still good to understand what the costs are, and it shouldn't erase the work that you're doing, right? So, um, I guess the last, canned question that I'll ask here is, when it comes to Webgility, it's really easy for us to make the leap that we sort of replace somebody's job, right? Like in the past, Webgility has explained ourselves as, saving 10 hours plus a week on, manual reconciliation and manual tasks. And the obvious question that we get a lot is like, do you replace the bookkeeper? Should I hire a bookkeeper? Should I just use Webgility? And ultimately, having a bookkeeper is something that we strongly recommend. A bookkeeper or, a head of your finances, like a CFO, is an important role and very distinguishable from what Webgility does, from what any sort of integration or automation tool does, right? We can, as Webgility or an integrator, we can carry that data and make sure your paper trail is accurate. We can make sure that all the information that you need is at your fingertips. But we never want to be the people that are telling you what to do and telling you how to make your decisions for your business, because ultimately, again, I always say the lived experience is what's important here. Having a CFO, a bookkeeper, a head accountant or a CPA is very, very important because they have the context of what your business does. They, exist within your business on a very personal level. And I see these things as two very different things. So, bookkeeper generally will handle like the judgment and compliance, whereas Webgility or an integrator handles that mechanical grind, making sure that everything's posted, every cogs has an entry, reconciling payouts. That's all automatable, and that's what we aim to do, right? So, if there's any confusion about what Webgility is here to do, we are not here to replace bookkeepers. If there are any bookkeepers on the call, we're not out for your jobs. We're here to make your job easier. So, off my soapbox, we are a couple minutes over, but I felt like it was necessary to sort of go into that diatribe. So I appreciate you guys joining today. These sessions happen every single Thursday, and next session is going to be. I've made a couple edits here. I'm working with. We have a couple of e-commerce accounting professionals that we just brought onto Webgility that we've been working with, and sort of my I guess a problem that I run into a lot with my webinars and the things that I do is that I don't have real data to work with a lot of times. I don't have my own store. I don't have all these settlement reports and reconciliation data to work with. But working with our accounting team that we have in-house now, I put together a session for next week where we do a full teardown of e-commerce books, how they look, how Webgility sort of affects that, or automation sort of affects that, and how to make sure that you're sort of optimally poising or positioning yourself for the future in e-commerce accounting specifically. So that is what is showing up next week. This was sort of a placeholder session, which we'll push back. But again, I appreciate everybody joining today. It's great to have everybody on these sessions. Look forward to seeing you on the next ones. You'll get the recording and everything for this session probably either later today or early tomorrow. And then you should see an invite for next week's session early next week, usually Monday. And if you would like to sign up for these sessions and not have to be emailed and sign up every single week, there is a checkbox in the form on the landing page that allows you to just get added to the list for every single week. So you just get an email that says what the topic is, and you are automatically signed up for it, so you don't have to register. But again, appreciate everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week. Have a wonderful Thursday and a great weekend.